I clicked it on. It's just a matter of time before this thing goes live.
We don't July, and then we don't have one till September, and October, October, November.
We're on the air.
Good evening.
Good evening.
Okay, so what happened was I ran out of time to do this. So I have had school and I have been ill, and I just did not have time to recap 67 chapters worth of stuff in like 2 days. So what we do have is Haggai, Obadiah, Nahum, Habakkuk, and Zephaniah completely recapped because, lucky me, I already did that in May of 23 when I came back for my second term. And then as far as the stuff that we've done since I've been back, we have Zechariah, Hosea, Joel, and Amos completely recapped. I didn't actually put the application for Amos, and I don't know why I did that, but basically those are completely done. And then all that would leave would be Jonah, Micah, and Malachi. And we can hit those next week very briefly before we start James. So, you don't have any fill in the blanks tonight. I gave you a little bit of a break. All right. So you're welcome. I know. Judy will be happy because she always misses at least one.
That's right.
And it is color-coded. I might be a little blurry because I printed this originally off of the printer upstairs, which is kind of terrible. And it blurred, especially on lines where there's color. And then I used that to do all of your copies on this printer. So if it's blurry on the colors, I apologize. I tried not to use yellow this time since that was very hard to read last time. So you're welcome for that.
Thank you for that.
But there's, let's see, 3 colors that correlate to when the books were written. And then there's 4 colors that are sort of tracing major themes throughout all of the minor prophets. So the first one that we come across from is purple. And you see that in Haggai. Haggai is the first book that we covered in May of 2022. So yeah, like I said last week, that was over 2 years ago, which is crazy. It does not seem like that long. It seems like that was probably like 6 months ago that we first covered that. And the purple means that the book, or at least, at the very least, I tried to phrase it all in a way that says the message was given or the ministry of this prophet happened at such and such time, because as always, there's certain books that we don't know if the prophet himself wrote it or if it was later compiled by like one of his disciples or something. But at the very least, right, the message was given post-exile. So we're dealing with a post-exilic prophet. And that is true of Haggai. It was given to the Jews who were living in Jerusalem after the return from exile in 520 BC. And by our reckoning, that would be like August to December. But, you know, they used a different calendar back then. So, you know, don't try to, be aware of that when you encounter dates in the Old Testament. The overall message, and this is pulled straight from what I did May of last year when I recapped everything before we hit Joel. There's a couple of things. Get to rebuilding the temple, right? Haggai's all about rebuilding the temple after returning from exile. So get to rebuilding the temple. And then there's encouragement there. God is with you, right? And then third, everyone needs to be involved, right? Talk a lot about that top-down problem from the minor prophets, but it also kind of has to be a top-down solution to the problem as well. And you see that in Haggai. And then finally, right, the glory of this new temple is going to exceed the glory of the former. And we talked a little bit about how that was true just on like a architectural standpoint, but even on a spiritual standpoint as well, which is really what is probably getting at. It was more impressive than what came before. So the application of all of that, again, from what we did last year, the temple of our lives, right? We're not exactly called to build, a third temple in Jerusalem, but the temple out of our lives is a spiritual objective that's accomplished by our cooperation with God's will, right? So the people of Israel, they had to be in cooperation with one another. They had to be in cooperation with the leaders. They had to be ultimately in cooperation with God. And it's the same with us, right? If we want to build a temple out of our lives, our lives are now the sacrifice, as Romans puts it. So, second book that we covered was Obadiah, right? If you remember, came in, Lester had his heart cath thing, and I had to fill in twice. So what book of the Bible had 2 chapters? Haggai. Then I had to fill in again, and there was no guarantee that I was going to fill in after that. So I'm like, okay, well, let's just do like something that's one and done. 1 chapter, Obadiah. Both of those are minor prophets. So after we did Haggai and Obadiah, I said, okay, I guess we're just going to stick here. And we covered all the books with 3 chapters. We hit Joel, and then we just kept going and then went back and hit Hosea. So second book we did was Obadiah, also May of 2022. The date in the audience, so this was given to the kingdom of Judah. So that's blue. So purple is writing post-exile. Obviously, we're talking Babylonian exile, right? Blue is writing to Judah, pre-exile. Not necessarily pre-exile, because the very next sentence says after the fall of Judah, but return from exile. Written specifically to the kingdom of Judah after the fall of Jerusalem, but before the fall of Edom. So the fall of Jerusalem was 587 BC. The fall of Edom is recorded in Malachi as having already happened. And whatever source I was using when we covered Obadiah said Malachi was written after 516 BC, which is true, although we dated it quite a bit after that. So that would give us a general date for the book of anywhere between 587 BC to 500 BC. The message of Obadiah condemns Edom. It's kind of weird because, when you think like biblical prophecy, you often think it relating to Israel or Judah. Either very encouraging, right? Oh, like God's gonna, you're suffering right now, but God's gonna like return you to your land, and God's gonna like return to you, and it'll be good, and all, happy, smiley, or just like straight up judgment or condemnation, for 3 sins of Judah and for 4, blah blah blah. But with Obadiah and Nahum, right? Yes. Right. It's primarily talking about other nations, which is interesting. So it was given to the kingdom of Judah, general date 587 to 500. The message, Obadiah condemns Edom and prophesies their destruction. So if you remember, Edom had cheered on the destruction of Jerusalem, the destruction of Judah, and then they had also participated in that as well. And so there's sort of this escalating condemnation that God / Obadiah brings against Edom, where first, right, they watched the destruction, then they rejoiced over the destruction, then they started stealing, they started plundering, and then ultimately they were just killing people as they were trying to escape everything Babylon was doing. So God is going to punish the world for evil, right? There's sort of this very universal language that's used here. And then The house of Jacob shall be a fire. So, like I said, there's 3 colors that coordinate to sort of when it was written or what the focus is there. And then there's 4 colors that trace major themes throughout the minor prophets. And the first one we come across is green. Green is the idea that true Israel is those who have faith in God, those who actually follow God, right? It's not just because you're born under, you're born of an Israelite or you necessarily participate in certain covenantal practices, but it's by faith. And oftentimes, right, we go to Romans and we read that and we think that this is something uniquely Paul's idea, right? But it's really not. And it's found all throughout the Old Testament, but especially in the minor prophets. It's a very prominent theme. So the application of this message, pride made Edom fall, right? Pride always comes before the fall, right? We all know that one. Sin begins with passivity or, passiveness, I guess. As you know, right, there's this escalating condemnation. So they watched, but they didn't say anything. They didn't do anything. They didn't try to stop it. Then they rejoiced over the destruction of Judah. Then they participated in the plundering and then ultimately participated in the killing, right? So in our lives, right, sort of applying this, right, I mean, sin often begins with passively being okay with something, even something in other people's lives, not even something that we're doing ourselves. And then oftentimes that can and will escalate into us doing those things or even us doing worse things. The day of the Lord is coming, right? Again, talking about this sort of universal language of God punishing the world for evil. This is still future even for us. And then again, with that green highlighted text, true Israel is based on faith, not on blood. And it's the same way today, right? Just because you're necessarily born into a Christian home, just because you go to church, just because you're even baptized or take communion or anything like that does not necessarily mean that you're a child of God, right? So Nahum, third book that we covered this one in June of 22. Date and audience. This was given to the kingdom of Judah in the 7th century BC. It references the destruction of Thebes. So after that happened, which was 663, but it prophesies the destruction of Nineveh. So before that happened in 612, so our general dating would be anywhere between 663 and 612 BC. The message from Nahum, Judah was a vassal state of Assyria, and Assyria's paganism had rubbed off on Judah. Really, I could have highlighted that as sort of a top-down problem, although, it sort of started with Assyria. Their paganism had rubbed off on Judah, and so Nineveh, which is the capital, or was the capital of Assyria, was going to be destroyed, right? That's sort of all what Nahum is about. There's this idea that God is both vengeance and wrath, but also he is slow to anger, it says. And so they're put together, but not necessarily in contrast with one another, or, it's not two separate things. They're sort of interlinked. It talks about there being endless gold in Nineveh that is plundered. And when we covered this, we talked about, right, the capital of Assyria moved from Nineveh to, I'm going to say, I don't know. I don't exactly have my history textbook in front of me. I believe that that's correct. Basically, right, Nineveh fell. Assyria wasn't completely done for. They moved the capital. But because there was so much wealth in Nineveh and it was all sort of centrally located there, when Nineveh was plundered, they didn't really have the means to, rebuild themselves, right? Just because they moved the capital to Haran or wherever it was. They didn't have a lot of money. So we talked about, right, the prophecy of Nineveh being destroyed is sort of the prophecy of the downfall of the whole Assyrian Empire. And obviously that came later, but historians will tell you, right, it really sort of began with the fall of Nineveh. So we have total destruction of Nineveh, right? This language of total destruction is sort of another theme that runs throughout the minor prophets. And it's not just for other nations, it's also for Judah and Israel as well. Often very extreme, sometimes graphic language, depictions of war, famine, whatever. Also sometimes metaphorical language is used, all to emphasize total destruction on every sector. Agriculturally, politically, right, the kings are going to be cut off. Economically, right, it's just sort of, total destruction of everything. And that's the same with Nineveh. Nineveh, it says, sells nations through her harlotries and families through her sorceries. However, Nineveh will become the laughingstock, essentially, of that area when God shows the nations Nineveh's nakedness. Obviously, we understand that that's metaphorical. God's probably not going to strip all of the Ninevites and have them run around naked throughout the Middle East, right? But God's going to show them, right, their shame, specifically at having been, having their capital be destroyed. The application of all of this, right, God is both wrath and judgment, but he's also mercy. So wrath and mercy cannot be compartmentalized with God, right? You can't really point to a part of the Bible and say, well, this is an aspect of God's wrath, and this is an aspect of God's judgment, and then to another part of the Bible and say, and this is an aspect of God's mercy, as if there's only wrath and judgment here and there's only mercy here, right? Certainly there are parts of the Bible that emphasize one of those parts more than the other, but where there's one, there's always the other. They're all connected. It's all part of who God is. So this was written to the afflicted as an encouragement, right? Talked about Obadiah and Nahum sort of prophesying against these other foreign nations, which we think is a little weird. But you have to remember, it wasn't written to Nineveh, right? This likely never made it to Nineveh. In the same way Obadiah's message likely never made it to Edom. But this was written ultimately as an encouragement to God's people that God is going to get vengeance for what Assyria has done. And then finally, God takes very seriously causing his children to stumble, right? You see that in both Obadiah and Nahum, but right, Assyria's wickedness had rubbed off on Judah. There's sort of this present state of wickedness / despair. But the hope is that God's going to get vengeance because God takes seriously causing his children to stumble. And we sort of use that as our application point. The same is true today, right? People who their sole intention is to just stir up trouble in churches or, cause division among God's people. God takes it seriously. And oftentimes those people are judged by God here on earth, right? God doesn't always wait until the afterlife. So we need to look at our own life and make sure that we're not causing other people to stumble. And when we do see somebody stirring up trouble, in love, remind them that, what they're doing, God takes very seriously. Fourth, we covered Habakkuk. We covered this in June and July. There's like a month gap between chapter 1 and chapter 2. I don't know why that is. One of those weeks was probably like VBS or something. I don't know what was going on the other weeks. Date and audience. Given to the kingdom of Judah during the reign of Jehoiakim. We don't know that for sure. Giving a very narrow date, it would be after Jehoiakim was appointed king by Pharaoh Necho II, which happened in 609 BC, but before the Babylonians defeated the Egyptians at Carchemish of 605 BC. Now, this sort of unexpected, this language that, this destruction of the bands of Babylon was going to be unexpected, and as if no one could see it coming, is why most scholars place this as happening before Babylon defeated Egypt. Because after Babylon defeated Egypt at Carchemish in 605, most surrounding nations could kind of see the writing on the wall that, okay, Babylon is a force to be reckoned with, and we're probably going to be taken over at some point. So if, in fact, as Habakkuk sort of implies, this is something that's going to be unforeseen and sort of no one's going to really see it coming, that Babylon is going to take Jerusalem, then this would have to happen before 605. The message of Habakkuk starts out right. "O Lord, how long shall I cry, and you will not hear?" So I kind of made fun of people a little bit. I know that that's so hard to believe, but I made fun of people because I said, people oftentimes who say Habakkuk is like their favorite Old Testament book, they often, not always, obviously. I mean, I'm obviously very generalizing here. But a lot of times these people, they haven't really wrestled with deep theological concepts, because a lot of this is sort of like baby's first theological question of how can God allow wickedness to go unpunished? And then God says, well, I punish wickedness with wickedness. And then Habakkuk says, well, how can you do that and be just, right? And so sort of all in good humor, I pointed out that, this is sort of baby's first theological question. Nonetheless, and Habakkuk sort of guides us through them. Judah, it says, has made the law of God powerless at an institutional level. So this is color-coded orange. Orange is top-down problem, right? So at an institutional level, Judah's made the law of God powerless by just ignoring what it says, basically. And then right after that, we have a sentence that's color-coded pink. And pink is the need for justice or mercy. So, and that sentence says, their sense of judgment is corrupted. And then there's the phrase, justice never goes forth. So justice and mercy, right? Treating people right, politically, economically, just generally morally, by like not being a terrible human being to people, is a pretty major theme throughout most of the minor prophets. So moving on, there is coming a nation whose sense of judgment is also corrupted. So you have Judah, their sense of judgment is corrupted. There's no justice going forth. Right? Habakkuk's asking, how can you let justice go unpunished? God says, I'm not. Because just as your judgment is corrupted, there's coming a nation whose judgment is also corrupted, who God will use to punish Judah. Which then leads Habakkuk to ask another question. Well, how can you do that? How can God punish evil with evil and be just? And so God answers, right? He says, don't worry, Babylon too. I'm going to punish Babylon as well. And so Habakkuk pleads for the revival of his people, and he pleads for God to work like he did previously. And one of the things here is that God previously used Judah to punish other nations for the salvation of his people. And so God is going to use Babylon to punish Judah, ultimately for the salvation of Judah. So very interesting comparison that's drawn there. And then Habakkuk decided to rejoice in God no matter what may come. Very famous verses there. Then the application of this, God always punishes evil, right? When we covered this, I sort of, said this is like the circle of life where you have evil, which is punished by God, sometimes by evil people or evil nations. And then those evil people and evil nations are punished by God by evil people or evil nations. And it just keeps going. It's just the circle of life. Wickedness punishing wickedness, as I said it there. Another example of this top-down problem is Jehoiakim. So, it's the same thing as what's in the message portion. At an institutional level, right, the law of God is powerless. Jehoiakim, right, not a great guy, not a good king, not necessarily your role model you want to strive for if you're a king of Israel. And then, of course, the application is that we too make the law of God powerless. God is using Babylon to punish Judah for the salvation of his people. In the same way, right, God works for the good of his people, even when what he does isn't necessarily pleasant. Habakkuk was sort of uncomfortable with the idea that God would use evil to punish evil. That wasn't a pleasant concept for him. But, right, it was for the salvation of his people. And so God is always working for our good, right, for the good of those who love him and are called according to his purpose. Sometimes, right, the way he does that, we might not like, right? It might not be comfortable for us. And especially, even more so than Habakkuk, it might not be comfortable for us with our 21st century moral sensibilities, right? When you have entire movements of people that either disregard the Bible entirely or they try to significantly alter the Bible to make God seem less like a bully or a tyrant, because we have all those terrible passages in the Bible of God, judging nations or judging individuals for their sin. But God is working for the good of his people. Sometimes that's not always pleasant for us, but it is always just, and it is always for our good. So moving on into Zephaniah. This was the last book that we covered during my first term here. And this was all in August of 22. Literally, I covered Sunday night, and then Monday morning, I packed up all of my belongings and moved back to Fort Worth. So that was a crazy week. But Zephaniah, this was given to the kingdom of Judah during Josiah's reign. So that's blue for the kingdom of Judah. Josiah's reign began in 640 BC. However, this was likely given before reforms, which happened in 621. So anywhere from 640 to 628. Message. So you have this whole Day of the Lord concept, which is not exclusive to Zephaniah by any means, but is pretty prominent. Again, we have complete and total judgment, this time not for Nineveh, but for Judah, at the hands of their enemies because of their idolatry. Top-down problem, color-coded in orange. Special judgment is reserved for the leaders of Judah, right? I believe, well, here, I have it. Let me pull it up. If I would have bothered to write down the verse, this would help. But I believe it's Zephaniah that it talks about the kings and the princes of my people, and then it sort of pronounces judgment on that. As to where that is, I don't know. But anyway, top-down problem. Calls out the kings, calls out the leaders, and how they're influencing the common people into sin and idolatry. However, there will be a remnant that serves God and will be protected by God. And then this was very significant. We started out with Obadiah. If you go back to Obadiah, right, we had the color-coded green sentence there, right? The house of Jacob shall be a fire, and we talked about true Israel is based on faith, not by blood. Here's really where it's spelled out. If you didn't get it when we did Obadiah, you should, get it now. God calls Judah at large, undesirable nation, right? And literally, the word that is used here is like the same word that's used for like foreign, pagan, idolatrous nations. But the remnant that served him, he called my people, right? So again, just because you're an Israelite, just because you live in Israel or Judah, just because you maybe keep certain covenantal practices does not mean you're entitled to the blessings of the covenant. It does not mean that you're actually, a child of God, I guess. Sort of borrowing, I guess, New Testament language, although that is somewhat Old Testament language as well. The remnant is called God's people, and then God's going to destroy these other nations and their idolatry just as he will Judah. So just like in Habakkuk, right, God uses nations to punish Judah, but then he will punish those nations. Same theme found in Zephaniah. Complete and total judgment for Judah at the hands of their enemies, and then those nations God's going to destroy as well. The application of this: trusting in God alone can rescue you from judgment. One of the things is that there's it's in your in the message portion. There's a remnant that serves God, or there will be a remnant that serves God, and we be protected by God. And Zephaniah sort of uses this like unsure language. And again, I wish that I would have like written down the verse for this, but basically like, you may be delivered from judgment on that day, but there's no guarantee. And it's the same today, right? By trusting in God alone, you can escape judgment in an eternal sense, right? However, you might be caught up in God's judgment here on earth, right? I'm not going to try to point to anything specific because we can't really know. But, say that, there's a huge earthquake or something, and there's a big booming voice from heaven, God saying, "This is my judgment upon Talala for their terrible gas prices." Right? This is why I'm not God, because, I'm a very shallow person or whatever. Then, right, even if you're not involved in having terrible gas prices here, or even if you're truly a child of God that is following him, you might be caught up in that judgment, right? Your house might sit beside the gas station and your house might get destroyed. And it was the same way for the remnant of Judah. Zephaniah says you might be rescued from judgment, but you also might not. Right? Obviously, there's a spiritual restoration, there's a spiritual peace, but you might have to endure some suffering at the hands of Babylon, or at the hands of your enemies. So this brings us to Joel, which is, we're doing great on time, I think, which brought us to my second term. So from August the, 14th of 2022, skipping to May the 6th of 2023, when we hit Joel. Joel was the last book remaining that had 3 chapters. So I said, okay, we're going to do Joel, and then we're just going to go like as it's laid out in the Bible. So like, Amos, and then skip to like Jonah, Micah, Zechariah. And when we hit Malachi, I said we were going to come back and hit Hosea, because that's the only book before Joel, and then we'd be done. And sure enough, that's what we did. So the date and the audience of Joel. If Joel's ministry is pre-exile, then these prophecies were given somewhere in the 7th century BC. So it talks about a siege of Jerusalem, and we said it was either before the 597 siege or the 597 siege or the 587 siege. I argued it was talking about the 587 ultimate siege, but as always, there's different opinions. And it was written to the kingdom of Judah. The message, this is the weird one, right? I say that, and then we get into like Zechariah, which has people's face burning off. But Joel's pretty weird. It's got a whole bunch of locusts and stuff, and people have all sorts of opinions on that. There will be a locust, in little quotes, plague unlike anything seen before. So, right, well, what book was it? I don't know. Habakkuk, right? I said had to be before 605, likely before Babylon defeated Egypt, because no one was supposed to see Babylon coming. when they destroyed Jerusalem. In the same way, right, if this locust plague is truly, as Joel describes, unlike anything that anyone's seen before, then it's probably not talking about a physical locust plague, because those were quite common. It was probably talking about, right, the destruction by Babylon. God will restore what the locust took, right, what the crawling locust and the spitting locust and the whatever locust took, I will restore unto you, right? And then we have maroon, or whatever color you want to call that, off red, I guess. And this is pointing ultimately to the Messianic age, right? Obviously, in context, it's not, but final fulfillment, fuller fulfillment, however you want to say that, in the Messianic age. That's what that maroon color is. God's Spirit is going to be poured out. And obviously, I mean, that happened at Pentecost, right? Which I guess is sort of end of the Messianic age, beginning of the church age, but there's sort of an overlap there. So restoration will come in. Oh, wait. Let me back up. This is exciting. So I had the fun idea that because I had the most boring and generic titles for all of these different books, that I would give fun titles as we're recapping the books. But obviously I only did that for like 3 of the books. So next week, I promise, the rest of the books I will have fun and creative titles that you get to read. So I call this the prophetic timeline of Joel. The prophetic timelines of Joel. We're working with about 3 different timelines here. There's sort of the immediate timeline, or sort of a very soon judgment. There's an apostolic timeline, right? The Spirit of God being poured. Timeline. You can also think of this as different contexts for what Joel is speaking about. So sort of immediate or very soon, apostolic, church age, into Messianic age, and then end times. And then Joel sort of ends up blending all of this language together when he's prophesying judgment upon, once again, nations that benefited from Judah's downfall. And this is where we talked about, right, the slaves of Jerusalem and Judah being sold off to other nations, and then God prophesying judgment against those other nations. So God curses Tyre, Sidon, and Philistia, but he blesses Jerusalem. The application of all this, once again in maroon, because Messianic age, we as Christians are living fuller fulfillment of what Joel prophesied, right? What the remnant of Judah awaited before the exile, God's people still await today, right? This sort of end times, final like blessing and peace language, right? We're still waiting that today. But at the same time, we are post the Messianic apostolic age. So we are living in a fuller fulfillment of what Joel was talking about. So you have the very near context of Babylon, which Joel's audience obviously identified with, and those who came shortly after Joel identified with. You have the Messianic context, which we can identify with because we're sort of living in the we're living after that happened, and we're reaping the benefits of that, I guess would be a good way to say that. But then there's still an aspect that even we today are still looking forward to the fuller fulfillment of everything that Joel talked about. So Joel deals with multiple prophetic timelines. Next, we covered Amos, and that is the prophetic order of Amos. There's definitely an order to judgment in the book of Amos. We covered Amos from June 3. The date and audience overlapping Uzziah and Jeroboam II's reign, going like earliest start time versus latest death date. We got anywhere between 792 and 746 BC. However, Amos says that he's prophesying 2 years before the great earthquake. And we got into a little bit of archaeology. Multiple archaeological sites in that area attest to a great earthquake that happened around 760 BC, give or take 25 years. So if it's 2 years before that, that would be 762 BC, give or take 25 years. And he's prophesying to the northern kingdom. That's what the red is, once again. Prophesying to Israel. The message, Amos is from the south, but he prophesies against the north, right? If you remember, when Amos is sort of giving a defense of himself, I guess you could call it. He's like, man, I'm just a fig man from the south, coming up here to prophesy. Kind of sort of what he said. It's sort of a paraphrase. But he's from the south, but he's prophesying against the north. There's judgment oracles that are Philistia, Phoenicia, Edom, Ammon, Moab, Judah, and then finally Israel, the north. So, pretty wide. Other nations, we like to hear that. Then it gets a little bit closer, because we have prophecy against Judah. Oh, they're sort of our brothers. That's a little scary. Then it just gets straight to the point. For 3 transgressions and 4 of Israel, so it's sort of this tightening net of judgment. And this is the prophetic order of Amos. For 3 transgressions of blank and for 4, I will do this. There's the listing of specific transgressions, and then there's promised destruction of a specific place within the country or area that's being judged. So sort of that initial saying, that initial phrase for 3 transgressions and for 4, then it's, okay, here's exactly what you did, and then because of what you did, I'm going to burn the gates of your capital city or whatever. Specific place prophesied judgment against. There's this idea of the virgin of Israel has fallen. This was a pretty significant verse that I referenced quite a bit in our study. Right? God sort of, revoking the covenant because of all of the transgressions, continual transgressions. However, for the faithful remnant, right, they are promised life. Not necessarily physical life like we talked about with Zephaniah, but spiritual life. We're back to pink, which once again is the need for justice or mercy. There's legal corruption that is pointed out here. The dishonest judges and whatnot. Amos, in response to this, he calls for the establishment of justice, right? And God says he despises Israel's offerings because there is no justice. So that's all highlighted in pink there. God will deliver up the city. Right, talking about Samaria. Then Amos, pulling a little bit of a Joel here, he has a vision of locust, a vision of fire, a vision of a plumb line. And after these visions, this is where we get into a little bit of a narrative portion of Amos. This guy named Amaziah brings charges against Amos for prophesying the downfall of Israel. And in response to this, Amos, he just prophesies the downfall of Israel again, right? And this is also where Amos gives like the best comeback that I've ever heard in my life. If you're ever in a rap battle with someone and you want to really roast them, all you got to say is, hold on. Your wife shall be a harlot in the city. Your sons and daughters shall fall by the sword. Your land shall be divided by survey line. You shall die in a defiled land. And then once again, Israel shall surely be led away captive. So yeah, he's basically brought on trial for prophesying the downfall of Israel / Samaria. His response is, hey man, I'm just a humble sheep breeder and a tender of sycamore fruit from the south. And by the way, your wife's going to be a harlot, and your sons are going to die. And once more, just to sort of rub it in, Israel / Samaria. So the thing that got him in trouble, he just says it once again. You gotta love the guy. So back to Pink, the need for justice or mercy. In addition to calling out political injustice, he also calls out economic disjustice or dishonesty. Legal, I guess is the word I was looking for. Legal corruption, but also economic corruption or dishonesty. And then finally, God reminds Israel that what he has done for them, he's also done for other nations. So, right, don't think that you're special just because, way back when I gave you an Exodus. I gave an Exodus to other countries as well, right? Don't presume that just because, I rescued you from Egypt, that you can just do whatever you want to and not reap any consequences from that. And I don't know why I didn't put an application for this. I'll have one next week for you when we do this again. Okay, so skipping Jonah and Micah, we'll hit those next week. Zechariah, super cool title for this. The beginning of the Messianic Age. Or as I think I called it, the Proto-Messianic Age. We hit this was a long one. We hit this from November of 2023 to February of 2024. So we're finally into 2024. The date and the audience, chapters 1 through 8 we can solidly identify as being between October of 520 BC and 518 BC. The 8th month of the 2nd year of Darius. Once again, they used a different calendar. Don't worry about it. And then the 4th year of King Darius would be 518 BC. So everything 1 through 8 we can identify as 520, 519, or 518. Chapters 9 through 14, we don't really know, but we dated it later and even argued maybe that it wasn't, written down or even necessarily given perhaps by Zechariah. Late 6th century, early 5th century BC, making Zechariah a post-exilic prophet. So, post-exile, post-return from exile, right? You have 520 BC, August to December for Haggai, after the return from exile. Well, you have 520, 519, and 518 BC for Zechariah. So obviously that's also after the return from exile. So they're both post-exilic. After the decree was given that they could go back. The message of Zechariah, there's sort of an opening sermon, right? Your forefathers were evil. Do not be like your forefathers, that sort of thing. I'll just turn there very quickly. It's not very long. The Lord has been very angry with your fathers. Verse 2. Verse 4, do not be like your fathers. Right? They didn't take that message to heart, obviously. But it's a great message nonetheless. So there's that opening sermon, and then after that we have the 8 visions. So very quickly rattling off what the vision sort of entailed, and then I guess sort of what the meaning or emphasis or significance of that is. So yeah, first one is the vision of the horses. That was encouragement, right? God will again choose. We like to hear that one. There's second vision of the horns. this is also sort of encouragement. This is a reversal of the current struggle. The nations that afflicted Judah will be cast out, right? We like to hear that. Third, we have the measuring line. This is an affirmation of Zechariah's ministry. And you see this actually through at least two of the visions, if not three. Sort of either their primary purpose or sort of a secondary purpose is Zechariah saying, hey, when this happens, you're going to know that I was telling you the truth, and affirming his ministry. Fourth, you have the vision of the high priest. And this is color-coded in maroon because this is, again, right, the proto-Messianic age, the beginning of the Messianic age. There's an overlap with the end of the Old Testament, the end of that, and the beginning of the New Testament or the Messianic age. Where does it start? Nobody really knows. But, right, Joshua is purified, and there's the reinstitution of the priesthood, which is sort of paving the way for Jesus. What are we on? 5? Wait, what? 4 horses? Horns, measuring line, high priest. Yes, 5. The lampstand and the olive tree. So this is also maroon, Messianic age. Israel is fueled and empowered by Joshua and Zerubbabel. Joshua and Zerubbabel, you have the priesthood and the king or the ruler, right, coming back and again paving the way for the Messianic age, as we talked about. 6, the flying scroll. There's a curse that's going out over the thieves and over those who swear falsely by God's name. 7, the woman in the basket, wickedness being removed. That's the one that was really confusing. We just had to admit, we don't really know what this is talking about. But it does talk about wickedness being removed, whatever that means. And then finally, the 4 chariots. God's message is extending to the whole world. And obviously, we said that was ultimately fulfilled in the Messianic age. But by God's message extending to the whole world, even then, it was preparing the way for the Messianic age. So you see how that works. After these 8 visions, Zechariah, he deals with a group of people. They have questions about fasting. And he says, hey, what you should be doing, I paraphrase, is mourning the sin that caused the exile for which you are fasting. There's prophesied a reversal of the political and economic state. Currently, right, politically, economically, very negative. In the future, it's going to be very positive. There's sort of a reversal of all that. There's also a reversal or the inverse of God's current actions, right? He says, I determine to punish you, but I will determine to do good to you. Once again, with maroon, we have foreign nations are going to recognize God's blessing of Judah. And we said that that was fulfilled in the Messianic age, more fully in the Messianic age, right? You have all these nations, both Jew and Gentile coming, worshiping God. It says, no more shall an oppressor pass through them. There's this prophecy of the future king riding the donkey. Obviously, that was fulfilled in Jesus Christ. And we even gave the benefit of the doubt to the Jewish interpreters. And we sort of went through their line of, goodness gracious, that train has left. We went through their line of reasoning as to why that is not referring to Jesus. And hopefully, anyway, we all came away agreeing that, no, actually, they're wrong. And it is referring to Jesus. And so that was a good time. It says, I will also bring them back from the land of Egypt. And this was talking about all people, Jew and Gentile. Again, Messianic age, church age, final fulfillment. God revoked his protection over Jerusalem. This is the 2 staves, right? When Zechariah has a sort of living sermon illustration thing where he's a shepherd. Breaking the staff, revoking the protection over Judah, and then breaking the staff of the bonds between the north and the south. So it was interesting because you had sort of restoration language for the north, and then a couple chapters later, you have the bond between the North and the South breaking. You had reunification language of the North and the South. And then a couple chapters later, you had the bond between the North and the South breaking. So that tells us we can't really interpret the reunification stuff too literally. God revokes his protection over Judah and the bonds between the North and South. And then all of this is, we talked about sort of 720 BC or like shortly after 720 BC. Jerusalem is going to be under siege. They're going to be mourning for the one that they pierced. Right, God coming in judgment against Jerusalem for rejecting their Messiah. 2/3 are going to die, right? It's a very, very big judgment. And I think that that's the chapter where I was the madman that did the math, and it kind of sort of added up. People's faces will melt off. We talked about how that was, Mount Vesuvius, and people's faces literally did melt off. And judgment for, right, obviously killing Jesus. And then all the nations worshiping, right, Jew and Gentile coming together to worship God, fulfilled ultimately in the church age, right? The application of all of this, the Messianic age doesn't really have a definitive start date. I mean, if you want to just be like very strict, I mean, I guess it would be the incarnation of Christ, right? But that was planned, right? Jesus did not become the Son of God when he was born, nor did he become the Son of God when he started his earthly ministry. He's always been the Son of God, right? Theologians talk about the eternal begottenness of Christ, which is very confusing, and I cannot explain it to you, but that's how it is. It was planned, obviously. So, you have to push it back a little bit. I mean, there was the announcement to Mary, right? Which obviously preceded Jesus' birth. So you could even say, well, it started there. But then, I mean, before that, there was John the Baptist who was preparing the way. So does the Messianic age start with John the Baptist? But then no, we read in the minor prophets, Zechariah specifically, even in the days of Zechariah, of Joshua and Zerubbabel, all of that was happening was preparing the way for God's message to go out over the whole world, where the whole world would eventually come to God, acknowledge Jesus as their Savior, and worship God. So pretty cool. That was probably my favorite book that we covered. Finally, Hosea, super cool title, Worshiping in Spirit and Truth. And then this is all we got for tonight. We covered this one from March through June of this year. And we literally just wrapped this up last week. Date and audience. Hosea married Gomer prior to the downfall of Jehu's dynasty in 753 BC, because one of his kids' name is sort of a pun, prophesying the downfall of Jehu's dynasty. And then this is a quote from one of the scholars I use. Most of Hosea's messages come from the last 3 decades of Israel's history. And Hosea prophesied to the northern kingdom. That's why it's in red. The message of Hosea, he had 3 sons by Gomer that represented the end of Jehu's dynasty, the fall of the northern kingdom, and God withdrawing his covenant by invoking, if you remember the big Hebrew lesson we had, the same name that he instituted the covenant with. Very significant. So I talked about there's actually 4 symbolic names there. Hosea and Gomer's 3 kids, and then also God's name has a purpose. This is in green because this is true Israel is by faith, not by blood. The Gentiles who were previously called not my people would become known as children of the living God. Don't get this confused with the reference to not my people of Hosea's third son. Third son. That's one instance of that phrase. And then next chapter, those who were not my people will be called children of the living God. That was fulfilled in the Messianic age, right? And in the church ages, the gospel went out to the Gentiles. So yeah, actually that could be green and maroon, if you wanted to make it that. There will be a new head or a new ruler, not a king, chosen by the people, who will be unlike any of the current or previous kings or rulers of Israel. That's in maroon because that was ultimately fulfilled in Jesus Christ. Israel is heavily syncretizing Yahweh worship with pagan worship. This is huge throughout the book of Hosea, and I'm sure that you're tired of me talking about it. The syncretism, right? A little bit true, a little bit false, throw it together, and you get some sort of whack combination of, it's not really paganism, and it's not really, Yahwehism. Is just sort of its own thing. Israel's instruments of worship will be taken away. Obviously, that pointed to exile. We have another orange. This is a top-down problem. The priests are negatively influencing the prophets and the common people. Additionally, the kings, the priest, and just generally the house of Israel are called out for being a snare and a trap to the rest of Israel. So top-down problem there. God withdraws himself from Israel. God says he's a lion. He's going to tear. He's going to take away. But just as the lion withdrew himself from Israel, the lion will return to Israel. And Israel will be restored by seeking God's face. This is in pink. Once again, this is the need for justice or the need for mercy. Israel's root problem was their lack of knowledge of what God actually required, which is mercy and justice, right? Not just sacrifices, not just going to the temple, going to the altar, giving money, giving harvest, whatever, but mercy. Israel said, right, devoured their judges and their kings have fallen. Well, that's true historically, right? There's this rapid change in Israel's kings, and also a rapid change in Israel's foreign policy. We talked about that. There's a reversal of the Exodus that's prophesied. This also can only happen during exile. There's a disregard for the manner in which God should be worshipped. This is why I subtitled this Worshiping in Spirit and in Truth. It's not just, we can worship God in Bethel or Samaria, just like we can Jerusalem. We'll make our own temple. We'll have our own Feast of Tabernacles. God says, no. There's a method. There's a manner to which I should be worshipped. And I've already told you what it is. And they disregarded that. There's a reversal of the Feast of Tabernacles. This also is due to exile. Israel is just as sinful as they previously were. Chapter 6 and chapter 9 makes a lot of callback to Israel's past and their failures, and the emphasis is always sort of, as before, so too now, maybe even worse. God will exile the bull of Jeroboam. Right, he made the golden calves at, is it Bethel and Gilgal or Bethel and Samaria? I don't know. The golden calves, and these are said, right, Israel's going to be exiled. They're going to depart. But in the process, these false gods are going to be exiled, and the false gods are going to depart. So very cool use of the language there. Neither Israel's gods nor their kings could save them from exile, and they were relying on both. We talked about they will literally rely on absolutely anything, anyone, except for God, right? I'll call out to Assyria. I'll call out to Egypt. I'll call out to whoever, except for God, right? But, we do the same thing sometimes. Out of Egypt, I called my son. This is in maroon because that's a reference to, it was ultimately fulfilled in Jesus Christ. His son shall come trembling from the west, the Gentiles coming to know Jesus. There is a reversal of the conquest of Canaan. That also could only happen in exile. There's this cycle of transgression bringing about bloodshed and death, bringing about more transgression, bringing about more bloodshed and death. The cycle is broken by a possible resurrection. And we saw that in both Hosea and in Paul's usage of Hosea. There's transgression, bringing death, bringing possible resurrection for the remnant. It says, Israel will no longer rely on foreign powers or foreign gods, but will dwell under God's shadow. So there's a happy ending for the remnant, at least. The application of Hosea was, don't syncretize true worship with false worship, right? And we talked about ways that people do that sometimes. Second, the manner and the method of worship is just as important as the actual act of worship itself. Obviously, Jesus was asked the question, well, you Jews say that you should worship in Jerusalem, but my granddaddy tells me we need to worship in Samaria, so which is? And Jesus says, hey, a time is coming and now is where God is worshipped in spirit and in truth. And so, yeah, we're not exactly, if you worship in Talala as opposed to Claremore Ulaga, you're not syncretizing, you're not disobeying God. But there are ways in which, right, sometimes as Christians we can disregard the mode or the method of worshiping God, right? There is an order that is supposed to occur in worship. And so if you're just like, pedal to the metal, baby, we're bringing in, skydivers, and they're gonna, parachute into our church auditorium, and we're gonna have the Dallas Cowboy cheerleaders sing "How Great Thou Art." You're probably disregarding the method of worship. That's obviously an extreme example, but you could draw comparisons to modern times on your own. Finally, God can revoke the good things that he gives, right? The reversal of the Exodus, the reversal of the conquest, right? The reversal of whatever agricultural, economic, political blessings that God has given. God can take those away, right? So don't presume upon that. Okay, we only went 13 minutes over. So maybe it's a blessing in disguise that I didn't get to finish all of this. Next week, I'm going to... so if you want to, you can just throw this away, disregard this. It will have everything that we did tonight. So all of this will be the same. And then, let's see, like Jonah, Micah, and then Malachi will be filled out. We'll cover that really quickly and then jump into James. And both Jonah, Micah, and Malachi are short, so that shouldn't take very much time at all. Anyway, real quick, I want to ask, and I want to ask this now because I don't want to start James and then go back and ask a question about the minor prophets. But what was y'all's favorite book that we covered? This is the time where you speak. My favorite, I know I've said it before, has been Zechariah. I think I got the most out of that, and it was very cool to see. Kind of like we talked about with Joel, where there's sort of multiple timelines or multiple contexts for what he's saying. The same is especially true for for Zechariah, where everything he says can be read in a very if you're hearing this straight from the mouth of Zechariah, you're like, oh, this is a reference to Joshua, and this is a reference to Zerubbabel, and this is a reference to Babylon, and this is a reference to exile or whatever, right? But then obviously there's this fuller final fulfillment. So we, in a sense, understand Zechariah's own words better than Zechariah himself. And I thought that was very cool. But I want to hear from y'all real quick. What was y'all's favorite book that we covered?
Hosea.
Hosea? Because it's it's fresh on your mind. That's the only one you remember.
No, it's always been kind of. I've always kind of favored that one.
Hosea is fun because, everyone knows like the narrative portion of Hosea in like the first 3 chapters, but then there's like a whole like 11 other chapters that like no one ever talks about. So I enjoyed getting into the later stuff because, you don't often hear sermons about that part of Hosea. So I thought that it was cool to dig into that.
I think my favorite was Hosea also. We just recently did a Bible study on Hosea. So between you and the Bible study, I understood it a lot more.
Nice. Okay, everyone's just going to say Hosea. Nice. All right. All right, I will hand it over to Lester then for the prayer time.
Very good. It was good to go back over all that and kind of put some stuff together. Okay, we want to share our prayer requests and then go close in prayer and then come back again on Sunday. Sunday morning, Parker's going to preach the message he was supposed to preach last Sunday. And then Sunday evening, you better not. And then Sunday evening will be our fireworks outreach celebration thing. So it's going to be a busy weekend. Okay, the prayer request updates, just ones we kind of need to go over with. Jail ministry went very well last night and went very well this morning. We had 2 different groups this morning, and very good ministry time today. Let's see. Brandon Cherry, Eric Mohawk called me yesterday, and they had bought a small house, and moved into it down at Wagner. And they bought some land too that they're going to think about sometime later building a house back on. But for Brandon, they I guess gave him 6 years, and then but he's already fulfilled almost 2, so be down to 4, and it could even be a little bit less than that. So that was kind of the update that they had there, and.
Where do they stand on getting custody of Remy?
This week, they are getting immediate custody. Well, immediate custody, and then they are in anticipation getting permanent custody. The father has moved to Florida and left. So, and there's circumstances there, but I'll save that for after we're off. All that, but so they're doing well, and things are going pretty good for them. They're leaving this Friday to go up north where it's cool, so they're going to miss the fireworks thing. But anyway, they're doing well. And then just keep Landon in our prayers about his mission work there in Germany to the Turkish people.
They're having a like European, I guess like the World Cup, but it's like only for Europe or something. I think that's going on right now, and his team I think is going to go like pass out Bibles or material or something at least one of those games.
Okay.
And there's a lot of people, obviously soccer is huge over there, so there's going to be a lot of people that are going to come by there. So.
Be a good opportunity. Where you have lots of people gathering, there's an opportunity there. Our outreach this Sunday evening, why I put next Sunday on there, should be this Sunday. Didn't update it, I guess. We need to pray for John and Faith Wiley. John is in the nursing home. I'm not sure that I even know why he's...
It's a rehab center that he's in, and because he's been ill for a long time, really.
Oh, okay.
He's had I don't know exactly what all the problems are, but he's been fighting this for several years, actually.
Okay. and Faith is supposed to get out of the hospital and go to the same facilities. What I understand, is that right?
Oh, I didn't know that.
I think
I haven't talked
I
to
forget who said that. So anyway, they're kind of dealing with stuff with with her sister passing away and that. So keep all that in our prayers. I did put that, I think, down over at the end, but we'll get to it. But Israel and Gaza, the Ukraine and Russia, just keep all that in our prayers and whatever's going on. And remember the, what's that ministry, Caleb?
Back 40.
Back 40. I think he's been over there here in the last few weeks, and they're doing continuous ministry there. So keep that in
And
our.
they're still doing ministry in Peru too.
Yes.
They had posted something this week about their vacation Bible school they held in Peru.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I heard about that, but I haven't heard any updates. But keep Bob Theall's family in our prayers for their salvation. Jim Ridings and Laura Ridings still the same. Leslie Ames and family, and then Adam Peters. I don't have any update on him, but he just has a lot of medical issues, a whole lot. And Bud Carry On is back in the nursing home, is doing a little bit better. And then Mary's sister Fran is in the rehab center place there at the Baptist Village there in Owasso. Al Castro, can you pray for him concerning his cancer? And Austin Clinton, things are just still okay there. Still the same, not really okay, but still people dealing with storm damage, and a lot of people are struggling with insurance companies not wanting to come through and all that stuff. So
Slow to settle.
yeah, a lot of that. Yeah, from what I understand, there's quite a bit of that. So, and then Joe Harden passed away, and his funeral is this Friday morning, 10:30 at the First Baptist Church, Ulagal. And keep that family and those people there in our prayers. And then keep the family of Kellis Brown in our prayers. They just had one daughter. And his service is a week from this Friday at First Baptist Church in Sperry. And then there will be a memorial service for Don Kester, but it has not yet been decided or determined when that will be. So that is a memorial service.
That's Faith's sister.
That's Faith's sister, yes. And then Kevin Higgins, Robin Backward, her father, I just happened to run into him, and then one of the family, of the Higgins family, goes and helps Robin's father twice a week with shopping and stuff like that. And she was telling me about Kevin Higgins. They said he had a stroke in his spine due to an aneurysm, and they're thinking about bringing him, if they haven't done it already, bring him back here and then kind of decide what to do on surgery after kind of a healing time has to take place. So continue to pray for Kevin Higgins then, and kind of desperate situation there with him. And I think Kevin is the brother of Jason Higgins that last year took his own life. So that family is dealing with a lot. Anyone else? Any others?
What about you, Lester? How are you doing?
Kind of okay. I've been doing the rehab stuff. Yesterday I was there. I had a lot of shortness of breath, and I contacted the doctor, and he ordered blood work, and all of it came back normal except one of them. And the doctor said, well, everything's kind of okay, but normal's between 9 and 86, and mine was 152. So, and I don't know if we can do anything about it, but I'm calling back again and just let them know, because I'm still having that even today.
Well, we're going to keep you in our prayers.
And I'll just keep doing the rehab. Hopefully that makes things better. It did before, but for some reason this time it's not as rapid as it was before. But anyone else? Any others? If not, let's go to the Lord in prayer then, and just be in prayer for all these many needs here and others that we have heard about, and also be in prayer for this event on Sunday evening. It's not just a party or anything like that, but there are many, many, many people who will be here and in this area that we might have the ability to go out and just talk to people among the crowd and offer them a Gospel of John along with the book of Romans in that pocket book, and then their tracts as well, but that we might be able to, Lord, just show us the way to people who He's been dealing with, and that we might be able to bring some of those people the gospel so they might come to the Lord. Our Father, tonight we're thankful and grateful as we've come this evening. We're just thankful, Father, for all of your word, and especially the minor prophets in the Old Testament. We're thankful, Father, that in all of this we see your sovereign hand at work. You're a God of sovereignty, but you're a God of justice. You're a God of mercy and grace, but Father, you're a God who requires obedience. You're a God who requires faith on our part, and we just pray, Lord, that the things that we learn, the things that we hear, we can relate to and just make them in our own life. And we just pray, Father, that you'll bless the time this Sunday morning and the Sunday evening. Father, that all that takes place and is done will be to your glory, praise, and honor. We just pray, Father, you'll bring people who need to hear, and people that you've been compelling their heart to come and to seek and to find what you have. And we just pray, Lord, that you'll just put us in touch with those people, and that, Father, for the kingdom's sake, that there might be some or even many who would hear and believe and be saved. And Father, we just pray for each of these on our list, that we lift them up to you. We know that you're already at work in their need, in their life. We praise you, Father, for that, and we just ask, Father, if we can, for something that we can do, Lord, that we might be able to help and reach out to people. And we just pray, Father, you'll bless us as we leave tonight, as we come again on Sunday. And Lord, that you are glorified and honored above everything.